This is the presentation for the metal project for the sculpture class on planar sculpture. So with this particular project, you are going to create a planar sculpture using sheet metal and planar construction. The objectives of this project will be to explore visual relationships between two-dimensional abstract composition and three-dimensional form. To study linear, planar, positive, negative, light, dark, and spatial relationships. To work within the stated bounds of the problems, designing 3D sculptural form using flat planes. To develop an awareness of art historical context and resources. To develop knowledge of fabricating processes and skills. So this portion is recommended. You don't necessarily have to go through this process of making a paper model, but I have found it to be really helpful when it comes to planning out this particular project. What's helpful about doing this is you'll be able to just kind of plot out your design on your sheet metal. You'll know how much metal you'll need to use. You could also start planning things like putting tabs in, so it's easier to either weld two surfaces together or cold connect with using rivets to join surfaces together. For this project, you are going to be learning skills such as cutting and bending a metal, riveting, CNC plasma cutter, and the MIG welder. And some inspiration for these projects are coming a lot from architects, but then we're going to later in the presentation look at some other artists and their work as well. So what I want you to look for in particular is think about bent and folded planes, lines created by edges, edges in light and dark, positive and negative space. So you can also consider things like Japanese origami for inspiration, Victorian children's books, pop-up cards, dress patterns, packaging. Also think back to geometry class and think about patterns that will create various three-dimensional forms. So we're going to start off this presentation by looking at a series of different versions of architecture and how artists and architects are using different contrasting planes to create interesting compositions. So, this is the first example where they use really kind of rigid geometry, such as like a lot of like really square and rectangular windows, in contrast to planes that are a little bit more like triangular and rigid. You can also think about, something as subtle as how, material can bend. So, you can get some really nice bends like this in the sheet metal we are using. You could think about more contrasting shapes. So, curves versus geometric, very planar rectangular forms. Curvy long planes, and again, versus more geometric. You could also think about, how geometry can create more curvy shapes. This is a design that you may have seen if you've looked at the Epcot building down in Florida at Disney World. This design's typically from Buckminster Fullerene, and he's done a lot of architecture in this fashion. And then things could get a little bit more loose and abstract. And this architect's also thinking about positive and negative space by cutting into planes this way. And again, more of the contrast, like curves versus like rectangular planes, really kind of playing with those shapes. This is an architectural design this is from LA. This is one of the music houses. And then, think about the shapes, you want to use. So we're talking a lot about positive and negative space. And what's nice about doing the CNC plasma cutter is, you're able to put these different designs into your sheet metal. Now, things like this one are going to be a little too intricate because remember, you can't get as precise of detail as you can with the laser, where you can get these super fine, thin cuts. So, the cuts with the CNC plasma are definitely going to be a lot thicker. So I'll show you some examples as we get further into the presentation. But here's some up close ones, So this one got pretty thin and detailed. Um, but, like I wouldn't push it any further than something like this. And then, back to, more versions of planar construction. You really have the opportunity to think about like different forms and how they kind of come together. You can think about like how things could kind of slot together because we could easily weld parts of your pieces together. Again, some more examples of positive and negative space. Um, Go back here. This one, again, these thinner figures would be something that's like a little too thin. So you got to remember, you got to make your cuts a lot thicker. But I thought this was a great example of, using planes to layer. So that might be something to consider. Here's some examples of some student work that did this project in cardboard, but this can definitely be accomplished in metal. These are some more abstract designs. But in this project, I'm going to let you essentially make what you'd like. So, if you choose to do something a little bit more abstracted, you can. But then, we'll look at some examples that are a little bit more on the realism side of things. And again, like color, positive, negative space. You can also color your metal. Most people tend to not color their metal for the most part because, we can get the metal like really shiny. A lot of people tend to really like that. Or, we've had people that have, gone the route where they wanted it more like, blackened, so basic color work. But, you could do more extreme colors by using things like oil paint or enamel paint. That works really well on metal. Believe it or not, nail polish works fantastic on metal. So there's a lot of cool tricks that can be done. So just some things to think about. Here's some more ideas for planar construction. So this artist really thought about like how, the pieces kind of slot together and make a three-dimensional form. Same with this artist as well. So, it can get easy to make a more complex design, which is exciting. So again, another example of great geometric work. We took a look at this in the wood project, but you could think about something like this with the metal. And Diana El Hadid, we looked at her with the architecture project as well, and she's using different like contrasting versions of metal to create her designs. This is Mary Bates Neubauer. So, all of these are kind of like space-like forms. These happen to be made in plexiglass, but it's the same idea where we're working in planes to create some sort of sculpture. Here's another cool example. I like the way the artist used text and made planes to create a stairwell. And let's talk about how metal can be put together. So, metal's really, honestly, one of my personal favorite materials because I find there's a lot of really cool things you can do with it, and I like the way the material works personally. But what's great about metal is there's actually a lot of really realistic ways to put it together if you don't have access to a welder. So one way we're going to learn is riveting, which is a cold connection. So that means no heat is involved. And with this method, you use a rivet gun, which you can get fairly inexpensive at any kind of hardware store. They're usually going to be under $20. And then you get a pack of rivets. And what you would do is you would drill a hole, and usually it would be an 1/8 inch hole. You'd slot the rivet into, so if you're trying to do two pieces of metal together, you'd slot the rivet in the hole, and then you'd use the rivet gun. And basically, the way it works is it has a lever, and you keep pushing the lever until you hear a click, and then you'll feel the rivet pop into place, and then there's a little nail that'll come out of the rivet gun. But you'll be seeing that in person shortly. Other technique is using sheet metal screws, also known as tech screws. The way you know they're a sheet metal screw is you will see this little end here. And what that end is, it means it's a self-tapping screw. So that means, you can essentially put this in metal and then like drill it in just like you would with a regular drywall screw for wood. Um, but if you tried using a drywall screw on metal, it's not going to work so well because it doesn't have this end. And metal can be tricky to drill into because it does want to slide against a drill bit because you're using the similar material. You're using metal on metal. So typically you need something to kind of punch into the metal before drilling into as well. I even recommend pre-drilling before using this on metal if this is your preferred method of joining your different metal pieces together. So there's riveting, there's sheet metal screws for cold connections. Now, welding is hot connections. So essentially, using the kind of welding technique we're using is kind of like using a hot glue gun, but for metal. So I personally love welding. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I have been welding since about 2006. And I've learned how to really work with the material over time. And what's nice about welding is it is fast. It's really nice to join things together. And, if you do your welds right, it's, usually kind of minimal cleanup, but we'll work together to show everybody this particular technique since it does take a little bit of practice to kind of get going and get the method down. So again, we're going to recap some helpful tips. So again, I'm not requiring, but I am recommending a paper model to help you just kind of visually see things, plot out your design, figure out like if you need to make tabs to join things together, figure out your connection points for your metal. That's the main goal for doing a paper model. Then you need to figure out how you want to connect your metal. Like, do you want to use cold methods like rivets? Do you like that look on your piece where, the rivets are evidently showing, or sheet metal screws? Or would you like things welded together, a little bit more blended? Okay. Again, with the CNC plasma, you want to avoid making small cuts or areas that are super tight. It's not as accurate as the laser. The CNC plasma will fuse lines together that are too tight and it won't cut out your design. Refer to design principles such as variety, rhythm, balance, emphasis, proportion, scale, and balance to help influence your project design. And then the question you're always going to hear me ask, is what do you want your viewer to get out of your work? And who is your audience? And then before we end the presentation, I have some images I'd like to show you on preview here. So I'm just going to open this up and we're going to take a look at these couple of images. Okay, so to give you an idea of some things that people have done in class, I wanted to show you examples of some sheet metal projects that were done in the past for my classes. And, with this, with something that's really great to know about working in planes is if you design it in paper, most likely you'll be able to do a design out of metal, working in the planar form. So this person wanted to make a metal donut box, and I helped her plan out the design. And luckily what was cool was there was a template online on how to make a donut box out of paper. So I pretty much just followed the template on how to make this kind of box, and then I replicated it using our tools in the Fab Lab in metal. So this piece is all just joined together by folds. Eventually I would have riveted, some of these areas together, but the box was pretty sturdy and holding its own shape pretty well. We are using 18 gauge metal, so it does have some strength to it, which is pretty cool. Now, this is a really good example from last semester. This is Jess, my former student, who made this really wonderful cactus design. And what I thought was really great about the way she addressed this project was she really liked doing the welding a lot, and she decided she wanted to make cactus texture using the MIG welder itself. So all of these little beads on the cactus were all made with the MIG welders. So she kind of embraced the process of just using the metal methods and really came up with something pretty cool and unique. So she cut out all of these little shapes for the cacti on the CNC plasma and then welded everything together. So I thought that was a pretty cool approach. Now, this is one of my pieces that I just made on the CNC plasma, just so you can see example of, about how tight you can get it. I really pushed it to the limit, so I wouldn't go any tighter than this in any of your designs. And then finally, again, I mean, this is from actually one of my 3D design students. And I just wanted to show this example so you can see, what is possible just kind of making something in paper, because I sense that some of you might want to make some things that are a little more curvy. So in this case, this method was more geometric, but then she was able to accomplish, making design that was like curvy. Now, if you want to do something like this in metal, it is going to be pretty complex, just to warn you. But, something this complicated is possible. I did have a student make a deer head using a method similar to this. But, this can potentially be accomplished in metal. So I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone comes up with their designs.